Claudius's voice cut through my heart like an ice-cold blade. 72 years of life, and I had never imagined I would hear those words from someone I once called my son. My hand shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. The silence that followed his abrupt hang-up echoed through the empty house like a scream of abandonment, reverberating in every corner, over every piece of furniture, in every memory I had cherished with so much love. There I sat, Antonia, in the very armchair where I had stitched my grandchildren's first dresses, sewn my daughter Helen's party gowns, and endured sleepless nights when she was ill. The house that had once been the beating heart of our family now felt like a mausoleum of discarded memories. The old clock on the wall, an heirloom from my late husband, continued its merciless ticking as if mocking my pain and marking each second of a loneliness I never could have imagined. Hot tears traced down my wrinkled face, carrying decades of unacknowledged sacrifice with them. How had we come to this? How had the unconditional love I had poured into my family become an unwanted burden? These questions pounded in my mind as I gazed at the scattered photographs around the room, smiles frozen in time, embraces that no longer existed, silent promises of eternal love as fragile as wet paper. My story began more than 40 years ago when I was widowed at 30 with an 8-year-old daughter. Charles, my husband, was taken suddenly, a massive heart attack that left no time for goodbyes. I remember that morning as if it were yesterday. He kissed my forehead, whispered "I love you," and left for work. He never returned. Helen wept in secret in her room, and I had to be strong for both of us even as my world shattered. I turned our grief into determination. I learned to sew professionally and transformed the living room into a small workshop. My hands, once only caressed and cared for, learned to create beauty from fabrics, to turn scraps of cloth into realized dreams. I worked around the clock, accepting every commission no matter how little the pay. Wedding gowns, party dresses, school uniforms, each piece carrying a bit of my soul and the sweat of my efforts. Helen grew up seeing me as an unbreakable fortress. I hid my exhaustion behind smiles and masked financial worries with cheerful stories at dinner. When she wanted expensive toys, I made something even more beautiful from leftover fabric. When she dreamed of designer clothes, I created unique pieces that made her friends envious. My daughter was my reason for existence, my fuel to endure nights of sewing and Sundays without rest. I sacrificed relationships, opportunities, a chance to start a new love, vacations I had dreamed of, all for Helen. When she decided to attend university in another city, I sold my newest sewing machine to pay her tuition. When she needed money for her graduation, I pawned the wedding ring that remained my last physical memory of Charles. Each sacrifice was made with love and the certainty that I was building the future of the most important person in my life. At 25, Helen met Claudius. He was handsome, well-dressed, and spoke knowledgeably about business and grand plans. At first he was kind to me, praising my cooking, calling me a stepmother extraordinaire. I remember the first time he came to dinner. I cooked a feast using money I had saved for my arthritis medication. I wanted to make a good impression, to show that my daughter came from a family that knew how to host. The wedding was simple but moving. I sewed Helen's gown myself, months of work, each bead sewn by hand, every detail infused with motherly love. Watching her walk down the aisle, I felt my mission as a mother was complete. She shone with happiness, radiant and loved. Claudius seemed enchanted by her, and that was enough for me. In the early years we were a united family. I cared for my grandchildren, Michael and Sophie, as if they were my own. I spent entire afternoons telling stories, teaching old games, and preparing homemade treats they devoured with delight. Helen worked, Claudius ran his ventures, and I was the anchor that kept everything running smoothly. I felt useful, needed, loved. But things began to change subtly. Claudius made seemingly innocent remarks. "Mrs. Antonia, don't you think you're spoiling the children?" Or, "Helen, your mother could help the kids become more independent." At first I thought it was normal parental concern. Later I realized his hints were far less innocent. Visits became controlled. "Mom, today's not a good day. We're busy," Helen would say hurriedly on the phone, as if someone were listening. My homemade cakes, once joyfully received, were rejected. "We're on a diet, Mom." My hand-stitched outfits for the grandchildren were dismissed as unnecessary clutter. What hurt most was seeing Helen change. My daughter, once so loving and present, became distant and formal. Our conversations, once endless and full of confidences, shrank to questions about my health and small talk about the weather. If I tried to extend a visit, I felt her impatience, saw her eyes flit to the clock. For months I denied the reality. I made excuses for the growing coldness, blamed Helen's busy life, convinced myself everything would return to normal soon. I redoubled my efforts, stitched more dresses, baked more sweets, left loving notes on the door. It was like trying to hold sand in my hands. The harder I squeezed, the more slipped through my fingers. The last time I was in their home was Sophie's birthday. I arrived with a homemade chocolate cake, the secret recipe I had taught Helen as a child. Claudius answered the door with an impatient look. "Mrs. Antonia, today's not a good day. The children are with friends." Through the half-open door I saw my granddaughter playing inside. She heard my voice and called, "Grandma." But Claudius closed the door quickly, muffling her shout. I stood on the sidewalk, holding the cake nobody would eat, listening to my granddaughter's laughter behind that closed door. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't just rejection. It was the cruel certainty that I had become a burden to the people I loved most in the world. Then came that devastating call. After Claudius hung up, I spent days without leaving the house. I drew all the curtains, hung up the phone, and ignored the doorbell. The world outside continued to spin, but I was frozen in time. I sat in that armchair, staring into space, trying to understand where I had gone wrong. What sin I had committed to deserve such cruelty. In that painful isolation I made a decision that would change everything. I took pen and paper, those same hands that had stitched wedding gowns and rocked grandchildren, now trembling as I wrote my farewells. If growing old means becoming a burden, forgive me. I thought being a grandmother meant being a refuge, that being a mother meant being the root. Perhaps I've outlived my purpose, but know this: I will always be here, even if only in spirit. I tucked the letter into the sewing chest I had given Helen at her wedding, a hand-crafted wooden box in which she kept her special buttons and bright threads. I knew one day she would open it and find my words. It was not a letter of blame, but of love and understanding. I forgave her in advance, though I was the one who had sacrificed the most. I packed a small bag with the essentials, a few changes of clothes, the blanket I had embroidered with my grandchildren's names, an old photograph of Charles, and one of Helen as a child. I left the house in perfect order, dishes washed, bed made, plants watered, locked the door, and made my way to the bus station, carrying only my dignity and a grief heavier than any suitcase. At the station I bought a ticket to anywhere. The attendant asked for my destination, and I replied, "Whichever bus goes furthest." It turned out to be a coach to a small inland town, about 186 miles away. I sat by the window, watching my city fade as silent tears blurred my view. I left behind 62 years of memories, a lifetime of devoted love, to become anonymous. For days I wandered the streets of that quiet town, sleeping on park benches and living on the meager funds I had taken. People looked at me with pity or suspicion, just another old woman drifting without purpose, until a social worker found me and brought me to a modest but clean and orderly senior care home. There I met others with stories like mine. Mrs. Rose had been evicted by her son, who wanted to sell her house to pay debts. Mr. Manuel's grandchildren had placed him in care after his wife died, deeming him a burden. Each story mirrored my own pain. Each shared tear eased some of the weight in my chest. For 3 weeks I lived in that painful but liberating anonymity. I helped with activities at the home, told stories to the other residents, and taught the young aides how to embroider. Slowly I began to rediscover who I was beyond the rejected mother and grandmother. I was a strong, wise woman, capable of starting anew at 72. Then came the visit, that would change everything once more. It was a hot Friday afternoon when the receptionist called. "Mrs. Antonia, you have a visitor." My heart raced, part of me hoped, part feared, and there she was, Helen, my daughter, her face swollen from crying, her eyes red with guilt and despair. "Mom," she whispered, then broke into tears. I embraced her as I always had, with unconditional love, without reproach or questions. I felt her body tremble against mine, felt her tears soak my shoulder. In that hug I forgave 3 weeks of abandonment, months of coldness, years of growing neglect. I searched everywhere for you. Helen sobbed. I thought I had lost you forever. When I found your letter in the sewing chest, Mom, please forgive me for being so blind, so selfish, so ungrateful. But I needed to know how it had come to this, how she had found me. Helen told me that neither she nor Claudius had worried in the first weeks after I disappeared. They assumed I had gotten the message and given them space. It wasn't until the landlord called demanding overdue rent that they realized something was wrong. "We went into your house," Helen continued, "and it was as if time had stopped. Your calendar was still open to my birthday week. You'd written 'Call Helen' on every day, and I never answered. Your embroideries lay scattered across the table, the dresses you made for the kids that we'd rejected, and your journal." Helen paused, took a deep breath, and went on. "I read your journal, Mom. I read about the nights you stayed up worrying about us, the medicines you skipped so you could buy gifts for the grandchildren, the tears you shed in secret when we pushed you away. I read about the day Claudius was harsh with you in front of the children, and how you cried in the bathroom so they wouldn't see." In that moment I realized my daughter had discovered more than a letter. She had unearthed the naked truth of what our family had become. "And there's more, Mom," Helen said, her voice steadier. "I uncovered things Claudius hid from me. He has been manipulating our family for years. He turned the boys against you, told them grandmothers who visit too often spoil a child's upbringing. He monitored my calls, invented obligations when I wanted you to visit. He was jealous of the love I had for you. The revelation hit me like a blow to the stomach. Claudius, the man I had welcomed as a son, had intentionally destroyed our family bonds out of pure selfishness. It wasn't mere neglect or a busy life. It was calculated sabotage, the cruel manipulation of an entire family. When I confronted Claudius," Helen went on with clenched fists, "he didn't deny it. He said that women like Mrs. Antonius don't know when it's time to step aside, that my mother's presence disrupted our nuclear family dynamic. He said it looking me in the eye, as though it were perfectly normal. I felt a mix of pain and relief. Pain that my rejection had been deliberate and cruel. Relief that it had not been my imagination, that I had not misread the gradual change in their behavior." Helen described the final confrontation. When she unveiled all his manipulations, she demanded Claudius apologize and change his ways. He refused outright. "Choose," he said, "me or your mother. I will not accept her interfering in our lives again." "And I chose you, Mom," Helen said, holding my hands. "I chose the woman who gave me life, who sacrificed everything for me, who loved me unconditionally even when I didn't deserve it. Claudius can keep the house, the possessions, everything material. The children and I will start over, and you will live with us." Tears ran down my face again, but now they were tears of gratitude, rebirth, and renewed hope. My daughter had chosen true love over convenience, blood over manipulation, but I had to be sure it wasn't a decision made in the heat of the moment. "My dear," I said softly, "I don't want you to break up your marriage because of me. I don't want to be the reason for your separation." "Mum," Helen replied with a determination I hadn't seen in years, "my marriage was already broken. I just didn't see it. A man who can manipulate an entire family, who makes a mother feel rejected by her own grandchildren, who had the nerve to humiliate you in that phone call, he's not someone I want to share my life with." In that moment I felt proud of the woman my daughter had become. Even if it was late, she had made the right choice. In her pain she had chosen truth. We returned home that same day. The house I had left empty and forlorn was filled with life again. Helen had brought the children, my beloved grandchildren I had missed so dearly. 8-year-old Michael hugged me tightly and said, "Grandma, why did you leave? I missed you every day." 6-year-old Sophie presented a drawing she had made just for me, a colorful house with a smiling grandma in front of the door. The following weeks were a time of rebuilding. Helen and the children moved into my home. Claudius attempted to contact us a few times, sometimes angrily demanding reconciliation, sometimes offering false promises of change. But my daughter stood firm. She had seen the truth and would not return. We rediscovered our family routine. I resumed bedtime stories, made special snacks, taught old games again. Helen sought my advice about work and the children, laughing with me like in the old days. The grandchildren rejoiced in having a present, loving grandmother once more. Yet the most profound transformation took place within me. Those 3 weeks in the care home, as painful as they were, taught me that I was more than just a mother or grandmother. I was a whole woman with my own story, accumulated wisdom, and much more life to live and share. I began attending senior groups, making new friends, exploring abandoned hobbies. I returned to sewing, but now for pleasure, not necessity. My creations became thoughtful gifts for friends, and were sold at local markets. Ironically, my work found success just when I thought my time had passed. Helen also grew through the experience. She became stronger, more assertive, and more aware of the value of genuine relationships. She secured a better job, enrolled the children in activities they loved, and built a more authentic, fulfilling life. Claudius eventually gave up trying to win the family back. He moved to another city, likely to continue his controlling ways elsewhere. Helen calmly filed for divorce, confident she had made the right choice. Months after my return, as I stitched a new dress for Sophie, I reflected on all that had happened. That cruel call that had seemed to mark the end of my story was really the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter in which I rediscovered myself. My daughter learned to appreciate what truly matters, and my grandchildren grew up understanding the value of a real family. The pain of abandonment taught me that self-love is not selfish, it's necessary, that accepting disrespect is not virtuous, it's self-betrayal, that a 72-year-old woman still has much to live, create and teach. Today, when I look back, I see that the broken woman who left her home with a small bag and a shattered heart was necessary for the birth of this renewed woman who now tells this story. The suffering was not in vain. If it awakened awareness, strengthened true bonds, and taught me that it's never too late to begin again. If you have read this far, it's because you understand the value of authentic relationships, and the importance of giving voice to those often silenced. Subscribe to our channel to follow more true accounts like this, stories of overcoming that remind us human dignity knows no age, and that true love always triumphs over manipulation. Each story shared here is a mirror in which we recognize ourselves, and who knows, find strength to face our own challenges. The house is once again full of life. My grandchildren's laughter echoes through the halls, the aroma of homemade cooking perfumes the kitchen, and Grandma's stories rock the nights to sleep. Helen turns to me again for advice about work, the children, and life. We are a family once more, not perfect, but genuine. And me, I am Antonia again, not just the rejected mother or cast-off grandmother, but the strong woman who stitched dreams, raised a daughter with love, and learned how to begin anew when everything seemed lost. I am living proof that love cannot be defeated, only temporarily forgotten. When people ask if I bear any resentment toward Claudius, I answer honestly, no. He was the instrument of a lesson I needed to learn, my daughter needed to learn, and my grandchildren needed to witness. Sometimes the greatest cruelty paves the way to the greatest freedom. This is my story, the story of a woman who was humiliated, rejected and abandoned, but refused to accept that this would be her final version. A woman who turned pain into wisdom, rejection into rebirth, and ending into a new beginning. And if there is one lesson I wish to leave with those who hear this story, it is this: never allow anyone, even those who should love you, to treat you as disposable. Never let anyone diminish your worth because of your age, your limitations, or your differences. You are stronger than you know, more valuable than they make you believe, and more capable of starting over than anyone imagines. Today, at 73, I am more fulfilled than I was at 50, wiser than I was at 40, truer to myself than at any other time in my life. And it all began on the day I heard the cruelest words anyone ever spoke to me. Words that turned out to be the greatest disguised blessing I could have received. This is the power of a woman who chose not to die alive, even when they tried to bury her. This is Antonia's story, a simple woman who discovered she possessed extraordinary strength, the power to begin again, to forgive without diminishing herself, to love without losing herself. So I end this tale, not with a conclusion, but with a new beginning, because every true story of triumph does not end, it multiplies, inspiring other women to find their own strength, their own voice, their own way back home, to the home that exists within each of us, and that no one can ever take away. Right, single quote, right single quote, right single quote, right single quote. No! I've already said I don't want that old woman sitting at the table with us. The words rang out across the dining room like a slap, shattering not only the Christmas silence but also the last fragile strands that still tied me to this family I had built with so much love and sacrifice. I felt my fingers tremble as they released the wooden chair, the very chair I had occupied for decades, witnessing birthdays, celebrations, tears, and laughter. It was the head of the table, my place at life's banquet. In that moment, at 72 years old, with a heart breaking like glass in my chest, I realized I had lost far more than a seat at the table. I had lost my place in the world I had constructed, stone by stone, embrace by embrace, sleepless night by sleepless night. Tears stung my eyes but refused to fall, not in front of my grandchildren, who stared at me in shock, not in front of my son Mark, who froze mid-reach for his fork, and certainly not in front of the woman who had just ripped away my dignity as though peeling a bandage from a long-healed wound. Anna, my daughter-in-law, stood with arms crossed, her face contorted in a cruel triumph I would never forget. Her eyes gleamed with perverse satisfaction, as if she had finally accomplished what she wanted, banishing me from her own son's life. The silence in the room grew so thick I could hear my own heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Excuse me," I murmured in the voice that remained, each word costing a fragment of my soul. "I don't mean to cause trouble. I'll go." I slung my coat over shoulders that refused to still their trembling, gathered whatever dignity I could salvage from the ruins of my pride, and walked to the door, stepping out into the cold December night. The click of the garden gate closing behind me echoed like a lament for everything that had died in that moment. I wandered the deserted Christmas Eve streets, each step a memory, each corner a story. How had I come to this? How had the woman who once served as the family's gravitational center, a woman who bore the world on her shoulders when no one else could, become an obstacle to be removed from the table? Memories flooded me like an unstoppable deluge. I traveled back in time to the days when my hands were steady and my dreams still fit the future. I was only 22 when I married David, a good man who worked as a mechanic and dreamed of owning his own garage. We were poor but rich in hope. Our first home was a rented room where the kitchen, living area, and bedroom blended into one cramped space, allowing me to cook, iron, and talk to my husband all at once. Mark was born when I was 24, after 2 miscarriages that nearly drove me mad. I remember holding that tiny baby in my arms, making a silent promise he would have all I never had, he would become all I could never be. I worked as a seamstress at home, bent over the Singer sewing machine my mother had bequeathed me, stitching wedding dresses for women who could afford the dreams I had barely dared to imagine. David toiled 12-hour days, his hands perpetually smeared with grease, fatigue etched on his face, but he always came home with a smile for me and a joke for Mark. We built our life with our own hands, each accomplishment weighing as heavily as gold. The refrigerator we bought in 24 installments, the wardrobe David fashioned from reclaimed wood, the black and white television that was our luxury for years. When Mark turned 10, we finally bought our own house, 3 small rooms, but ours. I wept tears of joy as I planted the first flowers in its tiny garden. It was my little slice of paradise, the place where my family would grow, and where we would forge the most precious memories of our lives. The years passed like leaves carried by the wind. Mark grew up to be my shadow, my confidant whenever David was at the garage. I helped him with homework at the kitchen table, the same table where he would later tell me about his first crush, his teenage fears, and his dreams as a young man. He was my boy, my pride, the extension of everything I was, and everything I wished to be. Every penny I could save went into his education. If I couldn't afford a new school uniform, I washed and stitched the old one until it looked new. If he wanted a book beyond our budget, I spent sleepless nights sewing extra dresses to earn the money. I watched other mothers buy expensive gifts for their children. I improvised toys from cardboard boxes and creativity, but Mark never complained. Instead, he thanked me for every sacrifice, every night I stayed awake caring for him when he was ill, for every one of my dreams I made real for him. When Mark graduated with his engineering degree at 25, I wept like a child. There was my boy in cap and gown, fulfilling the dream I had never dared to dream for myself. David couldn't attend the ceremony. He'd been taken by a sudden heart attack 2 years earlier, at 58, leaving a void in my life that would never fully close. But I knew he would have been proud, wherever he was. A few years later, Mark met Anna, a beautiful woman from an upper-middle-class background, who worked in advertising, and had a way of speaking that intimidated me from our first meeting. She wore expensive clothes, spoke of places I had never visited, and looked upon our humble home in a way that made me feel small, even though I was its hostess. At first I tried to win her over. I cooked her favorite dishes when she visited, asked about her work, sought common ground. But Anna maintained a polite distance, a smile that never reached her eyes, a cold cordiality that left me uneasy. I felt I was an obstacle, an unpleasant reminder of her husband's modest origins. When they married in an elegant ceremony that cost more than I earned in 2 years, I felt I was losing my son, not dramatically or all at once, but gradually, like someone slowly losing sight. Visits grew rarer, calls grew shorter, embraces grew more fleeting. Anna had a subtle way of controlling Mark's schedule, arranging obligations for Sundays when he would normally visit me, proposing family outings that always conveniently excluded me. And if you followed this story, and felt a tightness in your heart, I imagine you've experienced moments when family love is put to the test. Subscribe now to continue receiving powerful stories like this, tales that will touch your soul, and remind you that even in the hardest times, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. Don't miss the next reports that will change your perspective on family, forgiveness, and the extraordinary power within each of us. The grandchildren arrived like a breath of new life in my increasingly lonely existence. Sophie, 5, and Paul, 3, were the lights of my eyes, little sons warming my heart whenever they visited. With them I felt important again, needed, unconditionally loved. They ran into my arms, begged for stories, fought over who would sleep in my bed during sleepover. But even those visits became less frequent. Anna always had an excuse. The children were sick, had birthday parties, needed to study. When they did come, Anna was tense, monitoring every move, every treat I offered, every game I suggested. It was as if my house, my love, my very existence were dangerous to her children. The tension reached its peak on that accursed Christmas Eve. I had prepared everything with such care, the roast turkey recipe taught by my mother, the special stuffing Mark had adored since childhood, the dessert the grandchildren always demanded. I laid the table with my best cloth, lit candles, arranged fresh flowers from the garden in a small vase. I wanted it to be perfect, a night to reunite us as a family. But from the moment they arrived, the atmosphere was oppressive. Anna barely greeted me, avoided my embrace, discreetly criticized the decor, the food, even the simple gifts I had bought for the grandchildren. Mark looked uncomfortable, attempting to diffuse tension that swelled like a storm about to break. It was when I approached my chair, the head of the table seat I had always occupied, that hell opened before me. Anna's words weren't mere words. They were poisoned daggers finding every insecurity, every fear, every pain I had silently carried for years. In the days following that terrible night, something inside me died, not my body, which despite my age, remained relatively strong, but my spirit. I stopped cooking elaborate meals, stopped arranging garden flowers, stopped waiting. The house fell silent, an unending echo of the loneliness, settling in as a permanent guest. I spent weeks analyzing where I had failed as a mother-in-law, a grandmother. I replayed every conversation, every gesture, every moment seeking an explanation for so much contempt. Perhaps I truly had been an obstacle. Perhaps my presence was a burden. Perhaps the world would be better without me taking up space that no longer belonged to me. Then life decided to teach me that winds can shift with devastating and unexpected force. The call came on a rainy Tuesday in March. It was Mark's voice, broken in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child, terrified by nightmare. "Mom," he said, and in that single word lay all the world's pain. "Anna had an accident. She's in the hospital in a coma. Doctors don't know when or if she'll wake up." My first instinct was to run. Nothing mattered between us now, not the cruel words, not the humiliation, not the pain. Anna was the mother of my grandchildren, the woman my son loved, and she was suffering. I grabbed my purse, the keys to the old car David had left me, and drove to the hospital, hands shaking on the wheel. I found Mark in the hospital corridors, a shadow of his former self. He'd visibly lost weight in those weeks, eyes red and hollow from tears and sleepless nights.